On the 5th of December 2012, at 6:15 in the evening, a car carrier called the MV Baltic Ace was making her way across the North Sea, roughly 40 miles off the Dutch coast, bound for Finland. On board, 1,417 brand new Mitsubishi vehicles were stacked across 8 decks. A routine crossing, the kind her crew of 24 had done dozens of times. Then the Corvus J, a container ship, strikes her in the side. The impact tears open the hull. Water floods the cargo decks in seconds. The Baltic Ace lists hard. Crews scramble for the life rafts, some climbing along the side of the ship as it tilts past horizontal. There is no time to put on survival suits, no time for much of anything. She sinks in 15 minutes. 13 crew members are pulled from the freezing water. 11 are not. One of the busiest shipping lanes on Earth. Modern radar. GPS. Every safety system money can buy. And still, 11 people did not come home. So why is this sea still so dangerous? The North Sea sits in a tight pocket of northwestern Europe, bordered by Britain to the west and the European mainland to the east and south. In the north, it opens out towards the Atlantic. In the south, it narrows into the English Channel. 8 nations share its coastline. Hundreds of millions of people depend on it. But what makes the North Sea so dangerous has nothing to do with its size. It is, by ocean standards, remarkably shallow. Most of the southern basin sits at depths of less than 120 feet. The average across the entire sea is only around 300 feet. Compare that to the Atlantic, which averages nearly 13,000 feet, and you begin to understand the problem. In deep water, waves lose energy as they travel downward. The sea absorbs them. Here, there is nowhere for that energy to go. It stays at the surface, builds, and steepens. Waves that would be manageable in the open ocean become something else entirely in these waters, shorter, steeper, and far more violent than their height alone would suggest. The deepest point is the Norwegian Trench, running along the Norwegian coastline and reaching around 2,300 feet at its lowest. But most ships never sail anywhere near it. They travel the busy southern routes, the approaches to Rotterdam, Hamburg, and the English Channel, where the seabed is barely further down than a 10-story building. That is the sea these ships cross, every day, in all weathers. Every autumn and winter, cold air masses sweep in from the Atlantic and funnel into the North Sea basin. They have crossed thousands of miles of open ocean to get there, building speed and energy along the way. When they arrive, they find a sea that is too shallow to absorb them, so the energy stays at the surface, where it does its damage. Waves here build faster and steeper than they do in deep water. In a severe North Sea storm, significant wave heights can exceed 60 feet. On New Year's Day 1995, instruments on the Draupner oil platform in the Norwegian sector recorded a single wave reaching 84 feet. A rogue wave, the first of its kind ever scientifically confirmed. The sea had produced something that, according to the models of the time, should barely have been possible. Then there are the tides. Along the British coast and through the southern estuaries, tidal ranges average between 13 and 20 feet. That is an enormous volume of water moving in and out on a fixed schedule, and when a storm arrives at the same moment the tide peaks, the two forces combine into something far greater than either alone. The result is what mariners have always known, and what forecasters still struggle to fully predict. Conditions on the North Sea can turn within hours, calm in the morning, dangerous by afternoon, and life-threatening by nightfall. Satellite imagery and modern weather modelling have improved the warnings available to crews and coastguards alike, but they have not removed the uncertainty. They have only narrowed it. The sea does not care how good your forecast is, and it never has. People have been crossing the North Sea for as long as there have been boats capable of making it. The Romans used it to reach Britain. The Vikings used it as a highway for raiding and trade. By the Middle Ages, it was one of the busiest stretches of water in the known world and one of the most dangerous. The Goodwin Sands, a series of shifting sandbanks off the coast of Kent, gives some sense of the scale. More than 2,000 ships are believed to have been wrecked there across the centuries. During the Great Storm of 1703 alone, at least 13 warships and 40 merchant vessels were destroyed in the area in a single night, with the loss of more than 2,000 lives. Sailors called the sands the Ship Swallower. The name still fits. By the 17th century, the North Sea had become a battleground between rising European powers. The Dutch Republic had built the largest merchant fleet in the world, carrying goods between the Baltic, the Atlantic, and the colonies. England wanted that trade for itself. The result was a series of naval wars fought across these waters. The 4 Days Battle of 1666, one of the longest naval engagements in history, took place here. Fleets of hundreds of ships tore at each other within sight of coastlines that people still live on today. Whoever controlled the North Sea controlled the commerce of Northern Europe. Everyone understood that. The sea collected its toll from both sides regardless of who won. The pattern was already clear, long before the age of steam or steel. Ships came. Ships disappeared. The sea kept no record of the ones that never arrived. The sea's reach extended beyond the ships on its surface, as two cities would discover centuries later when the water came for them on land. Ships have been disappearing in these waters for centuries. Which wreck or disaster would you want to know more about? Let me know in the comments. On the night of the 31st of January 1953, a powerful storm system moved south along the British coast and into the North Sea. It arrived at high spring tide. The combination was catastrophic. The sea surged more than 18 feet above its normal level in some places, overwhelming the coastal defences across the Netherlands, England, and Belgium. People woke to water rising through their floors. In the Netherlands, where much of the land sits at or below sea level, 1,836 people drowned. 307 died in England, 28 in Belgium, and more than 200 at sea. It remains the deadliest natural disaster in the United Kingdom in the 20th century, and the worst flood the Netherlands had seen since the Middle Ages. 9 years later, the North Sea struck again. On the night of the 16th of February, 1962, a storm pushed a wall of water into the mouth of the Elbe. Hamburg sits 100 miles from the coast, but that offered no protection. The dike system broke at 60 points at the same time. 1/6 of the city flooded. 315 people died, most of them asleep in their homes in the borough of Wilhelmsburg. The man who coordinated the rescue operation that night was a young politician named Helmut Schmidt, who would later become Chancellor of Germany. Both disasters triggered massive engineering responses. The Netherlands built the Delta Works, a system of dams and surge barriers so vast that the American Society of Civil Engineers named it one of the 7 wonders of the modern world. Britain constructed the Thames Barrier. Hamburg rebuilt and reinforced its entire dike system. Those defences were designed for a sea that behaved as it did in the mid-20th century. The sea is no longer the same. The floods of 1953 and 1962 were the sea acting alone. But for much of the 20th century, it had human help. On the 31st of May 1916, the 2 largest naval fleets ever assembled in the North Sea came within range of each other off the coast of Denmark. The Battle of Jutland involved 250 ships and nearly 100,000 men. It lasted 2 days. When it was over, 25 ships lay on the seabed. Britain lost 14 of them, including 3 battlecruisers, among them HMS Invincible, which sank in minutes after her ammunition magazine exploded. More than 6,000 British sailors died, and over 2,000 Germans. Both sides claimed victory. The wrecks are still there off the Danish coast, largely untouched, treated as war graves. The Second World War turned the North Sea into something different. It became not a stage for fleet battles, but a hunting ground. German U-boats operated throughout the waters between Britain, Norway and the European mainland, targeting the merchant convoys that kept Britain supplied with food, fuel and weapons. Mines were laid across shipping lanes that had been used for centuries. Minesweepers were sunk clearing routes that had already been cleared the day before. The losses were staggering. Across the broader European theatre, U-boats alone sank nearly 3,000 Allied merchant vessels during the war. Many hundreds of those went down in or close to the North Sea. Some were never found. Fishermen still occasionally haul up debris in their nets, a piece of hull plating, a length of chain, a fragment of something that was once a ship, and only then does someone realize where a vessel went down and when. The sea does not announce what it is keeping. It simply keeps it. After 1945, the shooting stopped, but the North Sea did not become peaceful. It became a different kind of battlefield, one fought in silence beneath the surface and largely invisible to the outside world. The waters north of Scotland, between Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom, became the most strategically contested stretch of ocean on the planet. This was the GIUK Gap, the passage through which Soviet submarines had to travel to reach the North Atlantic and position themselves within range of the American coastline. NATO's entire naval doctrine for decades was built around a single question: how do you find a submarine before it finds you? The answer was a network of hydrophone arrays laid across the seabed, listening continuously for the acoustic signatures of Soviet vessels passing overhead. Patrol aircraft flew regular sorties across the grey sky above. Frigates trailed contacts for days at a time, and British and American submarines shadowed their Soviet counterparts through the deep water between one coast and another. None of this was publicly acknowledged at the time. It simply happened, continuously, for 40 years, while the shipping lanes above carried their ordinary cargoes and the fishermen hauled their nets and occasionally snagged equipment they were never supposed to know existed. When the Cold War ended, the listening posts were decommissioned and the patrols were wound down. The submarines themselves, as it would later become clear, had never really stopped moving. Want to know more about dangerous waters? Subscribe so you do not miss the next episode. While the Cold War played out in silence beneath the surface, something else was happening above it. The North Sea was being industrialized, and the assumption that engineering could finally master what nature and war could not would soon be tested. By the 1970s, the North Sea had become something new, an industrial zone, a vast network of oil and gas platforms anchored to the seabed across the Norwegian and British sectors, extracting the wealth that lay beneath the floor of a sea that had been killing sailors for centuries. The platforms were enormous, purpose-built to withstand the worst conditions the North Sea could produce. Engineers had calculated the loads, the steel had been tested, the math had been done. On the evening of the 27th of March, 1980, the accommodation platform Alexander L. Kielland was moored alongside a production rig in the Ekofisk field, roughly 230 miles off the coast of Norway. 212 men were on board. The wind was gusting to 40 knots, and waves were reaching 40 feet. Just before 6:30, those on board felt a sharp crack, and then a trembling that ran through the whole structure. A single support brace had failed, the result of a fatigue fracture that had developed undetected around a small hole where a hydrophone had been fitted. Within minutes, 5 anchor cables had snapped. 14 minutes after the first crack, the last cable parted, and the platform rolled over completely. 123 men died. Only 89 survived. The investigation found that there had been time to evacuate almost everyone. The structure held long enough. What failed alongside the steel was the command system: no clear authority, no clear order to abandon, and lifeboats that could not release under load. 45 years later, the North Sea would make the same point again, in a different way, on a different kind of vessel. On the morning of the 10th of March 2025, the container ship M.V. Solong was making a routine passage south through the North Sea, sailing a route it had used many times before between Grangemouth in Scotland and Rotterdam. The weather was foggy. The ship's captain, Vladimir Motin, was the sole watchkeeper on the bridge. 14 miles off Spurn Head at the entrance to the Humber estuary, the US-flagged tanker Stena Immaculate was sitting at anchor, her lights on, her AIS transponder broadcasting her position. She was carrying 220,000 barrels of aviation fuel on charter for the United States military. She was stationary. She was visible to radar. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. At 9:47 in the morning, Solong struck her at 16 knots. The collision ruptured a cargo tank and ignited the fuel. Both ships caught fire. The fire burned for 8 days. One crew member, Filipino able seaman Mark Angelo Pernia, 38 years old, died instantly on Solong's bow. His body was never recovered. A full minute passed on the bridge recording before the captain was heard to react. In February 2026, he was found guilty of gross negligence manslaughter. The North Sea floor is one of the most cluttered stretches of seabed on Earth. Centuries of wrecks lie scattered across a bottom that has never stopped accumulating the evidence of what happens up above. Viking ships, Dutch merchantmen, and English men of war. Underneath the wrecks are the pipelines, more than 12,000 miles of oil and gas infrastructure connecting the platforms of the Norwegian and British sectors to the shore. Underneath the pipelines are the cables, power interconnectors and data lines carrying electricity and internet traffic between nations. And underneath all of that, slowly corroding into the sand, is the ordnance. Estimates suggest that more than 1.5 million tons of unexploded munitions from the two world wars lie on the floor of the North Sea and Baltic Sea combined. These include bombs, mines, depth charges and torpedoes, dumped deliberately after 1945 as part of the disarmament of Germany, or simply left where they fell. Their metal casings have been rusting for 80 years. Every new offshore wind farm, every cable installation, every pipeline laid across the seabed requires a survey to find what is already there, and a plan for what to do when it is found. None of this makes the North Sea safer. It makes it more complicated, a working sea built on top of a century of catastrophe, where the next hazard may already be there, waiting beneath the surface. The sea keeps everything. It simply buries it. The North Sea is not a museum. It is a working waterway, crossed every day by thousands of vessels carrying fuel, food, vehicles, chemicals, and people. It connects 8 nations and handles some of the busiest shipping traffic on Earth. It has radar, GPS, AIS transponders, weather satellites, and coast guards monitoring it around the clock. And yet the pattern holds. Ships still vanish, crews still die, and the reasons are rarely as extraordinary as the losses they cause. The sea has not become more forgiving because we have become more sophisticated. It remains what it has always been: shallow, fast, cold, and entirely indifferent to the technology we bring to its surface. It was doing this long before we were keeping records. It will be doing it long after the records stop. Subscribe so you do not miss the next episode. Let me know in the comments which part of this history surprised you most.